George Carlin once gave an interview where he said marijuana is a drug that engenders its own disuse. He explained that, after a certain amount of time, the expansive creative element of being high goes away and all that's left is the loopy, dull-witted effect. I found this to be very true for myself. In my teens and 20s, getting stoned had this golden feel where it felt like I was thinking on a different level and the world felt more vibrant. After my mid to late 20s, that golden feeling became rare. By the time I entered my 30s, it was gone. A permanent part of the past. Nowadays, on the rare occasion, when I get stoned, it's just a different form of intoxication. It's like a different flavor of being drunk, for lack of a better description. I'm not sure if this is the case for all people, or just for some. At the very least, it seems like the dull, sorta drunk vibe is good enough for a lot of people to keep going with it. For me, it isn't. Your mileage might vary, but it's important to know that the way weed makes you feel might someday change. Edit. This post seems to have resonated a lot with people. It's also neat to see that there's some variance with how people have or have not experienced this phenomenon. I feel like this is an area of marijuana usage that should be studied more. Right now, there's really only anecdotal information to go on. In response to some comments, here's what I've noticed for my own usage. It's really not a matter of tolerance. While taking a break from usage will make it easier to get stoned quickly, it's still the same stoned feeling that lacks the golden vibe of earlier years. I don't know if this is something that has more to do with age or with time spent using. It might be something that involves the developing brain and its elasticity in adolescence versus a fully developed adult brain being more rigid. It might be that the golden time is there whenever one begins usage, but is a limited quantity that runs out over time. This is definitely the factor most in need of study. So far as I've seen, strains don't make a difference. Some kinds of weed get me more stoned than others, but I haven't encountered any that have the same golden vibe from before. Next time I'm back home in Oregon, I'll give some different styles a try and see if there's any difference. Thanks to everyone for sharing their experiences. I had some friends like that. All they would do is talk about how much they smoked weed, what they talked about when they smoked weed, when they were going to buy and smoke weed. They'd always tell these stories and the punchline would be, of course we were so baked when it happened. It also got to the point where they didn't do anything for fun without smoking first. Wouldn't go out to eat as a group without smoking first. Wouldn't go to the movies without smoking first. Wouldn't play video games without smoking first. I get enjoying weed and being high making things more enjoyable, but when you go out to eat with a group and two guys spend the entire meal talking about how crazy it is that they are at a public restaurant high, or you go to the movies and the only thing they talk about after is how trippy and weird and hard to follow the movie was because they were high, or you are playing video games and every 3 minutes they have to remind you they died because they are too high, it gets really annoying. It's like I couldn't have a real conversation with them about anything interesting because they were always too high to talk about that stuff and the only thing they could talk about was how high they were. It honestly became their entire personalities for a while. Panic attacks. For me, and I guess many others, weed accentuates and magnifies any feelings I have prior or during the high. If I'm happy, weed makes me laugh till I cry happy. If I'm horny, weed makes me crazy horny. If I'm feeling depressed or anxious, much more sad anxious, to the point of inducing panic attacks. I have absolutely no history of panic attacks, and have only ever had them while very stoned and feeling low. It's a fucking horrible feeling though. Short of breath, become paranoid about breathing, heart rate skyrockets, sweat comes on, convince myself I could potentially have a heart attack at any moment. It spirals until I almost convince myself I'm about to die. 2 hours of manic terror, then slowly I get my senses back and think why the fuck do I put myself through that willingly? Sometimes weed can be good for thinking outside the box and gives me clarity on things I must do to improve as a person. Other times it can scare the living shit out of me. I guess it all depends on your state of mind. I also find when smoking in a social setting surrounded by people I like that I never experience panic attacks. Must be related to state of mind, in that you are enjoying yourself in friend company. Here's a comment of mine that I sent to someone else. I have been smoking for almost 2 years and last night I had a sort of panic attack. I took a week-long break from smoking, and last night I decided to end my streak and took up. I smoked 2 puffs, and already felt stoned. But I was a fool, and decided to smoke more, and more. After 6 puffs I started feeling anxious and my heart was beating super fast. I was definitely panicking. My subconscious had taken over my mind and my thoughts were only negative. I forced myself to calm down, and had a glass of water. But it was awful, and it was the first time this has ever happened to me. It could have been the strain, which was a new strain, that my friend gave me, that was probably a sativa with low CBD. And it was probably also my lowered tolerance. And my mom has anxiety, so I think it runs in the family. Anyway, it was a pretty bad experience, and I hope it won't happen again. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I was a daily user for 30 years, and developed it after heavy consumption during illness. Edit. I'm thankful this got some attention. I live in a city known for its cannabis use, and was very open about my usage with healthcare professionals, and it still took a dozen trips to the ER over the course of a year before I was properly diagnosed. I've had a comical number of serious health problems over last 4 years, but CHS was the thing that finally broke me. The link really doesn't highlight how distressing the symptoms can be. I would be sweating so profusely that my jeans and hoodie would be entirely soaked through. Then there's the scratching, a combination of screaming and retching, accompanied by seizures and extreme anxiety. At one point I was begging the doctor to kill me. I'm a brain tumor survivor. I've had one continuous headache for 4 years. I could go on and on, but it was CHS that brought to that point. I hope this post helps others get diagnosed so they can experience some relief. Edit. If you are experiencing these symptoms, see your doctor to get a proper diagnosis and to increase awareness in the medical community. There's a lot of post claiming CHS is caused by pesticides, in particular neem oil. Any links to peer-reviewed studies would be appreciated. Edit. Neem oil does not cause CHS. Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I was a daily user for 30 years, and developed it after heavy consumption during illness. Edit. I'm thankful this got some attention. I live in a city known for its cannabis use, and was very open about my usage with healthcare professionals, and it still took a dozen trips to the ER over the course of a year before I was properly diagnosed. I've had a comical number of serious health problems over last 4 years, but CHS was the thing that finally broke me. The link really doesn't highlight how distressing the symptoms can be. I would be sweating so profusely that my jeans and hoodie would be entirely soaked through. Then there's the scratching, a combination of screaming and retching, accompanied by seizures and extreme anxiety. At one point I was begging the doctor to kill me. I'm a brain tumor survivor. I've had one continuous headache for 4 years. I could go on and on, but it was CHS that brought to that point. I hope this post helps others get diagnosed so they can experience some relief. Edit. If you are experiencing these symptoms, see your doctor to get a proper diagnosis and to increase awareness in the medical community. There's a lot of post claiming CHS is caused by pesticides, in particular neem oil. Any links to peer-reviewed studies would be appreciated. Edit. Neem oil does not cause CHS. OMG, they threatened to take my baby because my spouse smokes outside, away from me at all times. I wrote that he smokes medically for migraines on our intake papers because you should tell medical people everything in case they have to treat you, and men passing out in the birthing room and requiring medical attention is a thing. I did early intake, so the paperwork was submitted 2 months before I gave birth, but no one spoke to us about the smoking. My OBGYN knew about it and had no concerns. They just waited for me to be vulnerable. So there I am, freshly stitched back together and trying to figure out breastfeeding for the first time, and some bitch of a social worker strolls in and starts threatening to take the baby because we're on drugs. I'm on no such fucking thing, and we're Canadian. It was due to be fully legal in a few months time anyway. But she wanted her power trip. We had to beg and plead. Ultimately, it's what she wanted. I blame the stress she caused for my milk drying up hours later. She stole breastfeeding from me. This happened to me. I was literally unable to quit until I put myself into a rehab. Everyone else in the rehab constantly ridiculed me for being there because of marijuana when I was not arrested, but showed up of my own free will, but I just could not stop, and that was definitely an issue in a state where it wasn't legal. I only ever lived for the next high. I couldn't leave for work in the morning, couldn't do my job in the afternoon, couldn't relax in the evening, couldn't fall asleep during bedtime unless I was high, and was smoking anywhere between 4 and 8 times a day. Each time I quit and told myself I wouldn't anymore, I got incredibly suicidal and deeply depressed. It's just like with alcohol, I can drink it and be totally fine, but there are some people who, when they start drinking, they will just never quit. I'm glad someone mentioned this. I personally have 2 friends that I would smoke with that are schizophrenic now. They are disconnected from reality. One of them says he sees demons walking around, and he speaks in parables that make absolutely no sense. He used to be the funny guy from the group, always cracking jokes. The other is always trying to kill himself, will barricade himself in his room for days, and poop on his floor, and piss in a corner, to avoid contact with the outside world and can't maintain a conversation with people. Neither can hold down a job, obviously. I just took the MCAT, medical college admission test, and this exact topic came up in the test. Your comment should be higher up. Not a lot of people know about this. You are spot on there, but honestly the reason I argue that it's not chemically addictive is that you can quit cold turkey with no actual health risks. When someone drinks heavily, for example, it is very dangerous for them to just quit cold turkey. Sick to your stomach, delirium tremens, I don't even know what else. You can actually die just from not having alcohol, which blows my mind. I've seen people going through withdrawal from alcohol and it's very scary. Withdrawal from weed would be probably a grumpy person who might even get a headache, but will not have any real health risks whatsoever. More mood and maybe sleep impact than anything. That's why I would argue that it is not chemically addictive, just very much habit forming like anything that impacts you mentally or physically. It's silly for your friends not to acknowledge how clearly dependent they are on it. Honestly, they sound like a pain, and I'm sorry they don't have their shit together, but it's more of a mental dependence than a physical one. Hope that makes sense. I'm not trying to argue with you, but I feel very strongly that there is a big difference between a true addictive substance and something habit forming. Both can be dangerous, but they aren't quite the same. Everyone else has already mentioned the major negative facts. So here's a personal anecdote. My ex was an alcoholic who quit drinking and switched to smoking a huge amount of pot every day instead. He became addicted to weed as a replacement and became really irritable, withdrawn, and irrational at times. He insisted that the weed was helping his otherwise untreated depression, but I personally think it was just numbing his emotions and helping him ignore the fact that he felt awful all the time. I've known a few people who use weed to treat mental illness, and it rarely seems to have as much of a positive effect as they think it does, at least from a behavioral perspective. For context, I'm 18 years old and smoked weed for about a year, 3 to 4 months regularly, and I used to smoke with 2 of my good friend. That is until one day, at a family event, starting feeling really slow and barely able to construct sentences from time to time. Decided it was over, and I haven't smoked till then, about 8 months now. For the first couple months it was weird. I couldn't hear my thought anymore, so I would constantly be speaking to myself to hear me think. But now things are starting to get back to normal, but I lost one of those friends cause he didn't want to stop and didn't like the effect we both had and decided to start again. Fortunately the other one stopped with me, and now we are still best friends to this day. I don't believe that weed or drugs in general are a bad thing, in moderation, but please, if there's any fellas out there struggling to something similar, just stop now. It's not worth it getting permanent damage to your brain just for a year or 2 of fun. Peace. Sorry for any grammar mistake. English isn't my first language. Edit. Correcting mistake lol. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more daily 6 PM Reddit uploads.